Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 22nd of May 2024, but it's the 23rd now. I should have done this last night, but I ran out of steam thanks to JR who did the mapping for this. I may even bring out 2 mapping updates today. So this is a little bit out of date to a degree, but I think it's useful to go through these. If you don't know what the lines mean on my map, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. We're going to go to the northern area, Kharkiv offensive, where, as you can see, the Russians have slowed down an awful lot here. We have, remember the 2 blue lines, the southerly one here represents where the Ukrainians are at. That's their defensive line. The northerly one, in this case, represents the Russian defensive line that goes along with the other colours that represent the Russian defensive line. That you can see some really big difference here. Suryak Maps, the pro-Russian mapper, sees the Russians as having robust control further south of where Andrew Perpetua thinks the Ukrainians have their control, and like right through the grey zone here, that kind of no man's land. So the difference between the 2 blue lines is Andrew Perpetua's understanding of the no man's land. He just has a little bit of a game for the Russians up in the easterly part of this most northeasterly salient, the one around Vovchansk. No change to the one further to the west as they come down towards Lipsy there. That's the dangerous one as far as Kharkiv is concerned, as it would get their artillery closer to that second largest Ukrainian city. So not a lot of change there. There are claims. Andrew Perpetua's live stream the other night talked about how the Russians have brought some of their, or it might have been reporting from Ukraine, some of their troops from this northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea up to support the Russian attack here. Ukrainians will be bringing their own reserves from a number of places, including areas on the front line themselves. So it's going to be challenging, really, for the Ukrainians in many ways. But yeah, I'm not sure that the Russians really have enough wherewithal, enough resources to properly punch through here. We understand that the support for the troops in this area is being given by things like golf carts and bukankas driving up to the front lines. Even I saw motorbikes doing some of that restocking of frontline troops. There was a motorbike I saw with 2 tubes set to it. I don't know if it's like attached to the driver, some kind of elaborate backpack where he had a mortar in a backpack and 2 mortars or spaces for ammunition in these tubes and driving up that way. Now that might be quite effective, but I think it shows that this is mainly, if that was, I'm not sure the motorbike was from the Kharkiv area, but in this area it is very much a troop-led attack, not an awful lot of mechanized equipment as far as I can work out from the Russians. The Ukrainians have lost themselves quite a bit around here from more of the medium range drone attacks. The Lancets taking out a lot of Ukrainian artillery further back behind the line. Euromaidan Press yesterday said Ukrainian sources indicate Russian forces are concentrating limited, understaffed and incohesive forces in the Sumy direction. So that is further to the west. And I talked about this the other day. I said there's 30 to 50,000 Russian troops amassed in the Kharkiv area and involved in that attack. In the Sumy area, maybe as many as 15,000, but there are claims that they aren't really all that much, all that, as it says here, cohesive, well-trained, particularly well-staffed. So it is more of a diversion of trying to get the Ukrainians to move resources to this area just in case the Russians attack, but it's unlikely that they would attack with that kind of force, but you never know. Could be wrong. The ISW says despite a shortage of resources, such a grouping would be able to draw Ukrainian forces from other directions, and that could be the intention. Without firing a shot, they could cause the Ukrainians some consternation there. Horrible footage from Vovchansk. I've moved it on to not show you. I mean, I've paused it there. There's just dead civilians littering the streets of Vovchansk. It's horrible. Horrible footage from Vovchansk, which is being attacked heavily by Russian forces. Killed civilians can be seen lying in the streets. Fires and smoke everywhere. Most houses are badly damaged or destroyed. Russia only brings death and destruction. Just remember that this is supposed to be a war of liberation, that the Russians are coming in because apparently Ukraine doesn't want to be ruled by those Ukraine Nazis. They're coming to liberate Ukraine, etc., etc. And yet all they're doing is causing death and destruction everywhere they go. There's another report, I'm going to talk about that later, about how, you know, there are torture chambers all around. Like, administratively, what they do is they kind of, scare quotes, liberate an area and then torture the administration of that area in systematic torture chambers and cause death and destruction and commit war crimes by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. So we've got to remember that this is not just a war of like two sides equally against each other for some kind of, I don't know, just mere territorial dispute. This is an aggressive invasion by a war crime committing, torturing, systematically malignant force. Anyway, as we go down past that northeastern sector, you can see that that's calmed down. There were no changes yesterday or the last 36 hours in that whole axis, which I think is good news for the Ukrainians. And that could be because the Russians have lightened the load around here by moving some forces elsewhere. Although there were some movements in the Tabaivka and the Stelmakivka areas just here over the last week or so. But no change there, no change to that salient to the west of Crimea, where Ukrainians might well have been counterattacking. As we come on down past Bilahorivka, there have been some reports of huge bombardments of MLRS around Bilahorivka. I showed you that footage yesterday. So the Ukrainians there are having a hard time. The Russians are pushing, but it's a difficult place to have huge success in because of the topography of the area, as I have variously said before. So let's now come down to Chaziv Yar, where you can see that the Russians are pushing quite a bit in a number of places. Now, in the northern area around Bodanivka, around the canal micro district here, on the way to the canal that comes down, the Russians, according to deep state maps, have made some gains just into the very outskirts of that micro district. Of course, Surat Map says that the Russians have got robust control of the edge of that. They have been attacking there. Actually, Andrew Perpetua, I think, talked about this area where there are a couple of significant attacks, but the Russians were just massively repelled. They lost a lot of equipment and troops in so doing. And again, this is another example that I think was played out in that live stream where Surat Maps will just say, right, the Russians control this because there was an attack there, because there were some vehicles that were seen there, some troops were dropped off, even though those troops appeared to have been, and the vehicles certainly were destroyed. It doesn't signify at all that the Russians control this area, although it has been attacked. So, just be wary of that. I know I say that all the time. Andrew Perpetua now moving the Russian control further to the west in the Ivanivska area, including to the south of the road, the T0504 road. He's now somewhat in agreement with Surat Maps and Deep State in that particular area, although not all of Ivanivska is fully under Russian control, as he would claim there. So still some grey zones in that particular area. But worrying that the Russians definitely seem to have a lot more control of this zone than they previously did. And you can see, though, that kind of red zone, if you like, moving ever so closer to Chaziv Yar and the canal from the east. Then when we come down to Klishchivka area, a lot of argument over this. Andrew Perpetua again talked a lot about this, saying that the Russians have attacked into Klishchivka, but there's no one there. It's really difficult to maintain control over because it's just completely flattened. And if the Ukrainians have control of the trench area to the north, then they can get fire control over Klishchivka. Now, what's interesting is that there was all this argument over this trench network. So you can see the zigzag lines of the trenches all around here that Surat Maps claimed the Russians took control of months ago, but they never did. And then Andrew Perpetua talked about how there's ample evidence that the Ukrainians control this. Surat Maps is just plain wrong. Then eventually Surat Maps did reverse the claims, only really fully within the last week. And now, a few days later, they are claiming that the Russians now have control of all those trenches again, and indeed the whole of Klishchiivka, etc., etc. Konstantin, who is a Ukrainian who's got a lot of contacts, former fighter. I don't think he's based in Ukraine at the moment. He lives abroad, but he used to fight for the Ukrainian army. He was saying that his sources in the area, and he knows a few around here, are saying that that the Russians are losing 10 times what the Ukrainians are losing here. It's a really favourable ratio, this particular area, Klishchiivka area. So the Russians have lost sort of 200-300 over the last week or so, and the Ukrainians have lost 20 to 30. And he said that although that was still quite high for the Ukrainians in terms of their losses there, it was definitely in their favour, and that ratio is what they would like to continue with. So it's been really, really costly for the Russians here. Now, although Deep State Map says a grey zone is extended to this point, so they both the other mappers, Deep State and Andrew Perpetua, are not in agreement at all with Surat Maps with their claims here. So yeah, I would believe the other mappers here and not so much Surat Maps. There have been Russian. So why Surat Maps is claiming this is Klishchiivka is, as mentioned, sort of flattened, completely destroyed. There are no troops kind of trying to protect. There are very few basements here left to be able to occupy to get any kind of safety and shelter. So you can run the odd tank into there and then drop off some troops, and then as we've seen on video footage, garden shed tanks come in here. Those tanks with all the extra coke cages and corrugated iron on top. One came in here, then got hit in the rear, and then drove off with a burning behind. Drops off some troops. They then get targeted, and it's not like you control this area, and that you can have, I don't know, forward operating bases or whatever there, and command centers or anything, or any kind of nodes in this area. It's just complete grey zone destruction. So yeah, I don't think the Russians are in trenches or tree lines as far as the red line here of Surat Maps is concerned. It's just I don't think that is true. So I think Surat Maps has got that area wrong. Anyway, we'll come on further let's look at a couple of sources about Chasiv Yar. So Astrai Intel said yesterday Russian information channels are complaining about a further increase in the activity of Ukrainian artillery, as well as for the general situation in the area east of Chasiv Yar. Quote, it's difficult with Chasiv Yar, the 98th bit into the forest belts and reach the canal, but can't cross it because the enemy has long fortified positions above the canal. These are not just trenches, but a built defensive line deployed towards the canal. Crossing it here has to be done under fire. The enemy's artillery has become active. There are lots of drones, and they brought in ammunition. So the Russians are finding it difficult there. We'll look at that in a second. Surat Map says of the Klishchiivka area, the Western Heights. So after the capture and consolidation over the Western Heights, the locality of Klishchiivka was completely retaken by the Russian army. The Ukrainians are completely withdrawing their forces south and westwards, is the claim. I mean, huge area of land just taken in just like that. I don't think that's true, but it may end up becoming true. It could be that the Russians are pressuring enough in that area so that it becomes untenable for the Ukrainians and they do pull out, but I'm not sure that's happened yet. Now, talking about the canal area here by Chasiv Yar, it is worth remembering where the culverts are, because these where are they? Rigs, here they are. It's this one. So the Russians definitely have some chances of getting across here, and it's not going to be around here where you have the actual canal. It might not be full of water at the moment. I don't know that it presents a problem there. It might just be a trickle or whatnot, but it's these culverts that are effectively pipes. The canal goes under the ground, and these are in forest areas as well. And so actually this is where you can see the Russians are pushing for, from Bodanivka through Kalinina there to that culvert, but particularly this one that they have reached. They reached the pipe entrances there, and then were hit by drones. So this area is where they are looking, I would have thought, to attack. There are pipes above the ground here as well. I think that signifies a pipe. I don't know how easy it is for them to negotiate. There are 2 pipes there. Konstantin showed some footage of that the other day, some pictures of that. I think it might have been from peacetime, but it just gave you an idea of, what the kind of topography is here, what the situation is for the Russians. This is going to be where they're more likely to attempt to get across the canal under the cover of the wooded areas here, and then move up to attack Chasiv Yar that way. But of course the Ukrainians will be preparing for that, and so they are, as according to that source, they're sort of well dug in and using artillery and drones to stop the Russians there. So that is the situation in Chasiv Yar. We can see very interesting mapping here from the Avdiivka area, where only a small change around Solovyove according to deep state maps, but otherwise no change, as the Russians have kind of ground to a halt near Novoalexandriivka, which is pretty important, because this was a worry. They were going to look at interdicting that road. You got to remember, there is some interesting topography for the Russians to deal with around here. There's a watercourse that comes down there, doglegs around here, which would make it difficult for the Russians to easily get to that road. It's not just sort of plain sailing, just a couple of fields and villages there. That you've got, I don't know about the, yeah. So it does sort of raise, the land does go up in certain areas. You have to contend with water features and crossing them with mechanized equipment and so on and so forth. So they have ground to something of a halt there, partially it seems. And they're having more success further down to the south near Pervomaisky. But again, like, where do they go from here? So Karlivka is definitely what they're going to be aiming for, but they've got a bit of topography to deal with around there, and the Ukrainians might well be fairly well dug in, waiting for them. But they're having some success in Netalove that they seem to pretty much completely control now, and moving south into some of the areas in that direction. But it might be a case of trying to get in behind Novelsky. Novelsky seems to be this place that the Russians are unable to take. It's a small agricultural settlement that was it's well fortified. There were fortifications all around here, but the Russians have taken some of those fortifications. I remember some time back, it was a reservoir was one of them. I think this was called the swimming pool or something. That one there, that took some time to take that, but they did. So this was all of these areas are really well fortified with tree lines and fortifications and trenches. And Novelsky is holding out, and that was one of their ways of stopping Pervomaisky being flanked. But now, of course, with the whole Avdiivka attack, the Ukrainians have lost all that area to the north, but still holding on in Novelska. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, and whether the Russians will try and come down from the north from Pervomaisky to get in behind Novelska, or whether they'll be trying to get through to Karlivka, or both, and on to the west in the Pokrovsk direction. So that's Pokrovsk up there. But anyway, certainly some gains for the Russians in that area. Surat map says that the Russian army increased the buffer zone north and south of Netalove. Which we see from the mapping. Okay, then when we come further to the south, no changes in Krasnohorivka, no changes in Hayarivka, just to the west of Mariinka. We have Pobyeda, which is very similar to Novelska. That's now broadly under Russian control, which is a shame, because that was another place that had held out really, really well. Small sort of agricultural settlement again. And then we have some success in the Novomykhailivka area, where the Russians are pushing on towards Konstantinivka there. some small gains for the Russians to be seen there, and no other changes to the front line. No change in Velika Novosilka. Reporting from Ukraine's video was on that area today. Well worth a little look to show that the Russians had success. They'd attrited some of the Ukrainian artillery as just, attention was drawn elsewhere to the front line. This had been quite quiet, and then the Russians took advantage of that, but they seem to have been stopped somewhat by what the Ukrainians have been doing in that area. And then Robotyne has been pretty darned active for the last week or so. No changes to that. There might be further changes since JR did this mapping. We'll have to see. And no changes to the Dnipro River. We might see some changes around Krinky. Could be some rotations going on there, some movements around Krinky. I'm not sure of this area. You'd have troops moved up to Kharkiv from here to support the Ukrainians defending in that direction. Tim White yesterday said Russia has this morning been furiously attacking Ukrainian troops protecting the Krinky bridgehead on the left bank of Dnipro River in Kherson region. 3 separate attempted assaults were repelled, according to General Staff, but this cannot be independently verified. So I don't know if that's the Russians realizing that Ukrainians might be pulling out this area. I don't know. We'll see over the next few days, week or so. And that's my synopsis of what's going on. We shall see whether there'll be any changes later today, because there's undoubtedly mapping changes since these were done. Thanks so much to JR who did this, and sorry it's a little bit late. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.